Hey gang, and welcome back. Just a reminder, you can now use the promo code MTGMudsta, all caps, at flipsidegaming.com. You'll get 10% off orders over $10 and help with the channel at the same time. This week's game features one from L'Abyss, a game store in Montreal that I had the pleasure of visiting again while I was there for the holidays. I am playing my Locust God deck, and I keep a hand with Exotic Orchard, Windfall, Island, Reforge the Soul, Commit to Memory, Sulphur Falls, and Laboratory Maniac. Phil is playing his Trostani deck and keeps a hand with 3 Forest, Wood Elves, Cultivate, Phyrexian Processor, and Reverse the Sands. Vincent is playing his Neheb the Worthy deck and keeps a hand with Fellhide Petrifier, Command Tower, Neheb the Eternal, Soul Ring, Dragonskull Summit, and Ignorant Bliss. Lastly, the Master of Mono White Louis is playing Heliod and keeps a hand with 2 Plains, Ghost Quarter, Oath of Liege, Darksteel Ingot, Angelic Destiny, and Elspeth Sun's Champion. Louis wins the die roll and starts us off. Louis plays a Plains and passes turn. I play a Swiftwater Cliffs and gain 1 life before passing. Vincent plays a Swamp and casts a Soul Ring. Phil plays a Forest and casts a Soul Ring as well. Vince responds with a crisp high 5 and we pass to Louis. Louis plays a Ghost Quarter and passes turn. I play an Island and also pass. Vince plays a Dragonskull Summit and pays 4 to cast Neheb. Phil plays a Forest and pays 3 to cast Wood Elves. He finds a Temple Garden and passes turn. Louis plays a Plains and casts Oath of the Liege. On my upkeep, I choose Louis and go and find a mountain. I then play a Sulphur Falls and pass turn. Vince picks Phil on his upkeep and grabs a mountain. For the sake of time and editing, let's just assume if Oath is on the field, people are going to grab a basic on their upkeep. Vince then plays a Command Tower and casts Vance's Blasting Cannon. Vince then swings Neheb at Louis for 2, and upon connecting, Neheb's ability triggers, forcing us all to discard a card. Phil plays a Plains for his turn and pays 4 to cast his commander, Trostani. He then casts a Cultivate, which I copy with a Twin Cast to get more lands into my hand and onto the field. With nothing else, Phil passes turn. Louis, with his mouth full of poutine, grabs a Plains with the Oath and starts his turn. Louis then casts Chomano, Revolutionary, and passes turn. I play an Island and pay 6 to cast my commander, the Locust God. Vince exiles a land card off the top with Vance's and draws for turn. He then pays 2 to cast a Thematic Compass in his main phase, and then pays 3 to activate it to go and find a basic and puts it into his hand. Vince then plays the land he found and casts a Fellhide Petrifier. Moving to combat, he swings Neheb at me and I take 2 commander damage. We all then discard a card from the Neheb trigger, and Vince passes to Phil. Phil plays a Plains and casts a Phyrexian Processor, paying 39 life as it comes into play. Phil then pays 4 to activate the artifact, and gains life as the 39/39 token hits the battlefield and triggers Trostani's ability. Louis forgets his Oath trigger despite my gestures. He then casts an Angelic Destiny onto Chomano, and passes as it doesn't have Vigilance. I draw for turn, gaining an Insect token, and cast a Capsize in my main phase to bounce the Processor back to Phil's hand. I then cast Windfall, and we all pitch our hands and draw 4, dealing with the Processor. Louis decides to cast Enlightened Tutor, and I gain 4 more bugs as we wait for Louis to find his target. Louis finds Sword of Fire and Ice and puts it on top and draws 4 cards. Vince exiles Rakdos Key Rune with Vance's on his upkeep and draws for turn. He then pays 4 to cast an Avaricious Dragon. Vince then plays a Tainted Peak for his land for turn and casts the Key Rune. Moving to combat, Neheb goes at Phil, who is quickly chumped by Phil's Wood Elves. In his second main phase, Vince casts Terminate on my Locust God and not the 39/39, which I guess makes sense since all of his blockers are First Strike and Death Touch. At the end of turn, the Locust God is returned to my hand, and Vince flips his compass to reveal Spires of Orzaka. Vince then discards his hand because of the dragon trigger and passes to Phil. Phil plays an Emeria the Sky Ruins as his land for turn. He then corrects his land play and swaps a forest for Emeria, which we let slide. Phil then casts Green Sun Zenith for 6, which lets Phil find the Ulvenwald Hydra, who enters and he puts its own search trigger on the stack, along with Trostani's. Phil then has the Hydra trigger resolve first and finds Mirror Pool. Phil then gains 11 life from Trostani and the Hydra entering the battlefield. With nothing else, Phil passes turn. Louis doesn't miss his own trigger this time, grabbing a Plains. He plays a Temple of the False God. Louis then casts Heliod during his turn, and I vocalize how good the Hydra is with Reach over Trample. Louis then swings Chomano at Vince for 6 and passes turn. During my main phase, I pay 6 to recast the Locust God from my hand. I then cast the Winds of Change, and we all shuffle our hands in and draw that many. I draw 4, gaining 4 new tokens, and play a Myriad Landscape. I then pass turn. At the end of my turn, Vince pays 3 to bring Drown Your Temple to the field. Vince has some triggers on his upkeep, and resolves the Oath first to grab a land. And he then exiles Flurry the Horns with Vance's Blasting Cannons. Vince then plays Rix Matty, Dungeon Palace for his land for turn, and casts Painful Quandary. Vince then casts the Flurry, gaining 2 Hasty Minotaur tokens who also have Death Touch and First Strike thanks to Neheb and the Fellhide. He even came prepared with his own tokens, so you know Vince is up to some serious business. Moving to combat, he swings Neheb at me, which I stop with an insect token. In Vince's second main phase, he activates Rick's Maddie, and we all discard a card. At the end of Vince's turn, Phil activates Trostani's ability to populate and makes another one of the processor tokens, gaining an additional 39 life. Phil casts a Mirari's Wake in his main phase, paying no mind to the 5 life loss from the Painful Quandary. He then casts a Rox's Faith Mender, losing another 5 on casting it, but then gaining 12 from Trostani as it enters the battlefield. Phil then swings his huge tokens and the 1 Hydra at Vince, who blocks with his 2 tokens and the Fellhide. Phil responds to the blockers being declared by casting Heroic Intervention, and suddenly Vince's creatures having First Strike and Death Touch means nothing. At the end of Phil's turn, Louis makes a Cleric token from Heliod. Louis plays a Plains and casts Godsend in his first main phase. He gears up the Cleric and swings all of his creatures at Phil for 10, as Phil blocks Heliod with Trostani. It doesn't matter who I pick for the Oath trigger on my upkeep, and I draw, gaining another token. I then cast Memory in my main phase, so we all shuffle our hands and graveyards into our libraries and draw 7. I do take 5 from the Painful Quandary, which in retrospect is kind of silly since I would have shuffled in whatever I discarded. I get another 7 insect tokens, and I play an island before passing turn. On Vince's upkeep, he exiles Anthem of Rakdos with his Vance's blasting cannons. Vince then moves through his combat step to his second main phase and casts Necromantic Selection. Phil activates Trostani with the spell on the stack, and with Phil's activated ability on the stack, I cast Chaos Warp to shuffle away Phil's rocks, so at least he won't gain 80 life from the token entering. I lose 5 life, and Phil reveals Green Sun Zenith off the top and gains 40 life from the new token. Vince then brings back the Ulvenwold Hydra to go and find Urborg Tomb of Yawgmoth. Vince then casts Havoc Festival and plays a Rakdos Carnarium, bouncing a basic back to his hand. Vince then casts Key to the City and passes to Phil. At the end of Vince's turn, I forget to return the Locust God to my hand. Phil loses half of his life rounded up on his upkeep and plays a Nykthos in his main phase. Phil then casts Green Sun Zenith, where X is 3, and discards a land. He finds Reclamation Sage and takes out Vince's Havoc Festival before it gets to Louis and I, which I think is very nice of him. Phil then recasts Trostani and casts a Collective Blessing. Armada Worm then joins the team, and Phil gains 18 life from the 2 worms entering the battlefield. Louis grabs his land from his Oath trigger, and I realize my mistake with the Locust God. Louis then casts Call the Gatewatch and grabs an Ugin. Vince then reminds Louis about the Quandary, and Louis discards Relic Seeker rather than take 5. Ugin then hits the field, and Louis pitches Weathered Wayfarer. Louis then down takes Ugin for -6, and Phil responds by creating another worm token, gaining a further 9 points of life, and we then all exile colored permanents that cost 6 or less. I play an island for my turn and cast a Whirlpool Warrior, shuffling my hand in and drawing that many. I then discard an island as part of Tormenting Voices to draw 2 cards. I then cast Preordain, bottoming both and drawing a card. At the end of my turn, Vince activates his key to make my warrior unblockable and discards Filth. Vince untaps for his turn and pays 2 to pay for the key's triggered ability when it untaps to draw a card. Vince then takes pity on me and plays a Bajuka Bog, exiling my graveyard, which lets me send my commander back to the command zone. Vince recasts his commander, Neheb, and plays a Chromatic Lantern and follows up with a Fanatic of Mogus. This causes 2 damage to all of his opponents, and Vince redirects the 2 for Louis to Ugin. Phil plays a Forest and casts Trostani once more. He then casts Titania, who upon entering brings back a Forest and gains him 3 life. Phil then finishes off his turn with an Aetherflux Reservoir and passes to Louis. Phil lets the table know at this point that if anyone decides to be mean to him, he has more than enough life to take them out with the reservoir and not mind. Louis then casts a Surveyor's Scope and cracks it, allowing him to go and find 2 planes as 2 of his opponents have more lands than he does. Louis then brings out Elspeth's Sun's Champion and upticks her to make 3 soldiers. He then casts an Aura-Touched Mage, who lets him go and find an enchantment from his library and attach it to the mage. Louis grabs Eldrazi Conscription and slaps it onto the mage. At the end of turn, I sacrifice my Myriad Landscape to go and find 2 mountains. I reveal Reforge the Soul off the top, casting it for the miracle cost. Vince responds while the spell is on the stack with Unlicensed Disintegration, killing the Aura-Touched Mage and dealing 3 to Louis as Vince has an artifact. We then discard and draw 7. I play an island for my turn and cast an Unstable Obelisk. I then cast Psychosis Crawler and pass to Vince. Vince plays a Canyon Slough for his turn just before casting Pain Magnification. Vince then casts a Solemn Simulacrum, which Phil is upset over as it's not a Minotaur. Vince grabs a mountain and casts a Waste Knot. Vince then activates Rick's Maddie, and we have to track what we discard for Waste Knot. I pitch a land, giving Vince 2 black mana, while Louis and Phil discard 2 non-land, non-creature cards, giving Vince 2 draws. Vince then uses that black mana and 2 more to cast a Fellhide Spiritbinder. Moving to combat, Vince swings Neheb, who is unblockable because of Filth, at Louis for 2. We all then have to discard again, and 2 non-creature cards and 1 land hit the bin. Vince gets 2 more black mana and draws 2 more cards. Phil plays a Plains and sacrifices Mirror Pool to make a token copy of Titania. This gives Phil a 5/3 elemental token, and Phil gains 6 life from Trostani with 2 tokens entering the battlefield. Phil has the real Titania die and uses the new token Titania to bring back Mirror Pool. Phil then casts Mind's Eye and recasts Wood Elves and goes to grab a land. Phil then passes turn. Louie's a big fan of 4-costing spells, and this turn has him casting a Thran Dynamo, and then using the Dynamo to help pay for his copy of Solemn Simulacrum. Louis then recasts Heliod, and a great debate breaks out over whether Louis should tick Elspeth up or down. Louis decides to go with the down ticking, wiping out any creature with power 4 or greater. Vince gets a bit crafty at this point and resorts to casting Sudden Spoiling on himself to save all his creatures. Phil, however, decides to strong-arm it and doesn't want to lose his tokens, so he decides to take out Louis with his Aetherflux Reservoir. This means Louis' ability is no longer on the stack, as per Rule 800.4a, and we move on to my turn. I draw for turn, and Phil and Vince take 1. Phil also pays 1 to draw from the Mind's Eye. I then pay enough to sacrifice my Unstable Obelisk to take out Phil's Reservoir, as he seems to be gaining a tremendous amount of life this game, and I don't want to get sniped out of nowhere. I then sacrifice the Whirlpool Warrior, to which Phil responds to the activated ability by casting Path to Exile on my Psychosis Crawler. I grab a basic, and we all draw as many as we shuffle in. Vince activates Rix Maddie during his main phase and gains 2 black mana and 1 card from what Phil and I discard. Vince then casts Necrogen Mists and drops everyone's favorite Minotaur card, Didgeridoo. It's so good that even Phil and Louis aren't even sure what it does. Vince then discards a card to give his commander Unblockable, mainly just to lower his hand size as he already has Filth and Urborg combo going. Vince then swings the Spirit Binder at Phil for 5, and Phil has to discard a card because of the Pain Magnification. Vince draws because of Phil pitching, and Phil pays 1 to draw with Mind's Eye. Vince then casts a Bottomless Pit in his second main phase and passes to Phil. Phil resolves the random discard first, letting Vince pick, and discards Tooth and Nail, giving Vince a card. Phil also pays 1 to draw with Mind's Eye. Phil then discards a land, giving Vince 2 black mana, and moves to his draw step. Phil then casts Zendikar Resurgence in his main phase because he likes to double his mana and drops another enchantment, Angelic Chorus. Phil then casts Pathbreaker Ibec, drawing a card and gaining 6 life, and casts Elvish Mystic, drawing another card and gaining 2 more life. Phil then plays a Strip Mine and does his fun little trick with a Mirror Pool into Titania. Phil gains 12 life this time for the cycle, and he moves to combat. Phil swings the elemental token he made last turn at Vince for 5. Vince jumps it with the Solemn, drawing a card, and Phil pays 1 to draw as well. On my upkeep, I have no choice but to discard both cards, both being instants, and Vince draws 2 cards. Vince then activates his Didgeridoo before we change phases, dropping Ragemonger onto the field. I then draw for turn, and pay 8 to recast the Locust God. I then use the Locust God's ability once, pitching Thought Vessel and gaining an Insect token. I then cast Serum Visions, drawing and scrying 2 and putting them on the bottom. I then pass to Vince. Vince untaps for his turn, paying 2 to draw from the key. He then discards a card at random, and Louis discards Flurry of the Horn. Vince then chooses to discard Path of Ancestry and resolves his Spirit Binder trigger to put a token copy of the Pathbreaker E back onto the field. Vince then draws for turn. Vince plays a Temple of Malice in his main phase, scrying the top card. Phil responds to the scry trigger by using Strip Mine to destroy Urborg. Vince bottoms the card he was scrying in Sadness and bins his Urborg. Vince then activates Rix Maddie, and Phil and I pitch a land. Vince then animates Thraktos Key Ruin, and Lavacar reaches, and pumps the land by +8/+0. Vince then swings everything at Phil, all of which get pumped thanks to the Pathbreaker Ebec, and takes him out of the game. On my upkeep, I discard nothing twice and draw for turn, getting a 3rd Insect token. I then draw and discard, giving Vince 2 black mana and getting another Insect token. I then cycle Lonely Sandbar, giving Vince another 2 black mana and getting another Insect token. I then cast Ponder. I activate the Locust God once more, pitching an Izzet Charm and letting Vince draw a card. I then play a Ghost Quarter, and at the end of my turn, Vince Didgeridoos in Kragma Warcaller. Vince untaps and has his Spirit Binder create a copy of the Kragma Warcaller. Then, moving to his upkeep, and with the discard triggers from his enchantments on the stack, Vince cycles to Decree of Pain to remove my Insect tokens. Vince also loses a few creatures, but not as many as I do. He then discards 2 and draws for turn. Vince then recasts Neheb and swings enough to kill me, even with my Locust God blocking. Game review time. So this is one of the things that I love about EDH. I'd been away for almost a year, and I walked in the doors, and it was like I never left. It was great to see the old gang, and it was really cool to see some new decks and some new commanders. I'll be honest though, sitting down, Vince basically undersold his deck, saying that it was just a bunch of jank and tribal minotaurs. But watching it in action, he seemed to have a very clear line of play, and was able to get a lot of value out of forcing people to discard cards. I do think that Minotaurs as a tribe is probably underpowered, but I'm glad he built it and got a chance to showcase it on the channel. Phil seemed like the get-go winner in this game, and he gained tons of life and huge tokens that he was able to manipulate with Trostani. It seemed as though it took the combined effort of everyone to kill Phil, and in retrospect I'm really glad that I used Capsize and Windfall to deal with that Phyrexian processor. The idea of getting a 39-39 every turn is terrifying enough, let alone having 2 of those to deal with every turn. Louis was a bit slow to start, but Oath of the Lieges was able to keep him in the game as he was getting so many lands. It's a shame that he got taken out with the Aetherflux Reservoir, but it did allow me to learn about Rule 800.4a, which allows people to kill someone in response to a trigger being on the stack, and thus remove the trigger from the stack as the player is no longer in the game. That was pretty cool to see, and I have to thank Phil for showing it to me. Please bear in mind that this game was filmed back in December, so all the lessons that I've learned have not been applied to the game, and as a result, I played it pretty loosely. I also missed that Locust God trigger, which is frankly embarrassing, especially considering it was on camera. A blue control-based deck with combos in it is kind of outside of my wheelhouse, and yet somehow I'm able to pilot Drownu quite well. I'm not too sure why red seems to throw me for such a loop, but hopefully we'll get there in the future. Please be sure to tune in every Monday and Thursday at 11 AM Eastern Standard Time for a guaranteed new video. You can also follow me on Twitter at MTGMudsta. You can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/mtgmudsta. And lastly, you can check me out when I stream at twitch.tv/mtgmudsta. This video is brought to you in part by support from my Patreons. If you're looking for a way to help out the channel, please be sure to visit my Patreon link below. Thank you all for watching this video, and don't forget, friends are just opponents you haven't eliminated yet.